Welcome to the Restricted Handling Daily Intel Brief. This is what's been going on in Iran and the Middle East in the past 24 hours. The major development today is that the fragile U.S. Iran ceasefire framework has moved from a period of uncertainty into an outright confrontation over the future of the Strait of Hormuz. The immediate issue is no longer just whether commercial traffic can resume. The fight is now about whether Iran can preserve control over the rules governing one of the world's most important energy corridors. The latest escalation began after attacks on commercial vessels moving through the strait, including a Saudi-flagged oil tanker and the Qatari LNG carrier Al Rakayat. Iran has not officially claimed responsibility for the strikes, but Tehran has continued arguing that ships must follow Iranian-approved transit arrangements. The message from Iran is that reopening Hormuz does not mean simply restoring normal shipping. It means establishing a system where Iran retains a major role in determining how that shipping operates. That is exactly what the United States and Gulf partners are trying to prevent. The U.S. response was significant. American forces launched strikes against more than 80 Iranian targets, including air defense systems, command and control facilities, coastal radar sites, anti-ship missile capabilities, drone launch infrastructure, and more than 60 IRGC small boats operating around the Strait of Hormuz. The purpose of the operation was to reduce Iran's ability to threaten commercial shipping, but strategically, the message was broader. Washington is attempting to demonstrate that Tehran cannot turn a major international waterway into a mechanism for extracting political concessions. Iran's response came quickly. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps announced attacks against U.S. military facilities in Bahrain and Kuwait, claiming it targeted 85 locations and shot down a U.S. MQ-9 drone. Bahrain activated air raid sirens, and Kuwait reported that its air defenses were responding to missile and drone threats. The Iranian military leadership also issued a warning that U.S. bases throughout the region could be targeted. That threat is important because it expands the potential battlefield. Iran is signaling that any effort to pressure Tehran through maritime operations could bring consequences against the broader U.S. military presence in the Gulf. The diplomatic fallout was immediate. President Trump, speaking at the NATO summit in Ankara, said the interim U.S.-Iran agreement was effectively over. The agreement had been designed to create a 60-day window for negotiations on a broader settlement, including Iran's nuclear program, while allowing some economic relief and reopening commercial traffic through Hormuz. Trump indicated that talks could technically continue, but his comments reflected deep frustration with Tehran's actions and growing skepticism that diplomacy can produce a durable outcome. Iran responded by accusing Washington of violating the agreement through the military strikes and by revoking the waiver that had allowed Iranian oil sales. Iranian officials argued that the United States had undermined the framework by removing one of Tehran's key economic benefits. That economic pressure is already affecting markets. Oil prices jumped after the latest exchange, with Brent crude rising above $78 a barrel. The increase is significant because energy markets had started to stabilize after the fighting earlier this year. The renewed uncertainty around Hormuz immediately brought back concerns about supply disruptions. Shipping confidence is also taking another hit. Before the conflict, more than 100 vessels a day typically passed through the strait. Traffic had been recovering after the ceasefire agreement, but the latest attacks threatened to reverse that trend. Several oil and gas tankers reportedly turned back rather than risk transit after the latest escalation. The damage to the Qatari LNG tanker Al Rakayat highlights the stakes. The vessel was struck near the Omani side of the strait, suffered damage in an engine room fire, and required salvage support. The crew was evacuated, and the LNG cargo tanks reportedly remained intact, preventing a much larger energy disaster. The crisis became the dominant issue at the NATO summit in Ankara, where alliance leaders were already trying to manage disagreements over defense spending and the future of the alliance. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte strongly backed the U.S. response, saying Iran's attacks on commercial shipping represented a violation of the ceasefire and required a forceful reaction. European officials were more cautious, condemning Iran's attacks while warning that renewed U.S.-Iran strikes make a diplomatic solution more difficult. The summit also reinforced Turkey's growing strategic importance. President Trump praised Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and suggested that Washington could reconsider restrictions preventing Turkey from purchasing F-35 fighter aircraft. Turkey was removed from the F-35 program after acquiring Russia's S-400 air defense system, which U.S. officials argued could create risks to sensitive aircraft technology. One possible pathway being discussed would involve Turkey transferring the S-400 system to a third country, potentially allowing Ankara to return to the F-35 program. The broader significance is that Turkey is becoming increasingly central to U.S. strategy across multiple theaters. Ankara sits between Europe, Russia, the Black Sea, Syria, and the wider Middle East. It maintains relationships with both Western governments and Moscow, giving Turkey diplomatic flexibility that few other countries possess. That growing Turkish role is creating concern in Israel. Israeli officials have warned that expanded Turkish military capabilities could alter the regional balance, particularly if Ankara regains access to advanced U.S. aircraft. Meanwhile, Iran is also focused on preserving its influence in Lebanon through Hezbollah. Hezbollah is preparing to restart financial assistance programs for displaced Lebanese families in areas where it has traditionally maintained strong support. The effort is designed to rebuild political influence after recent fighting, financial challenges, and criticism from some Lebanese communities that Hezbollah's decisions have contributed to instability. The Lebanese government is attempting to compete with Hezbollah by providing its own reconstruction assistance while working through a new ceasefire implementation structure. The Military Coordination Group for Lebanon is expected to help coordinate Israeli and Lebanese military movements and support Lebanese armed forces' efforts to expand control in southern Lebanon. For Iran, this mechanism presents a challenge because one of Tehran's central regional objectives remains preserving Hezbollah as an armed partner capable of influencing Lebanese politics and deterring Israel. Syria is facing a different but related challenge, trying to transition from conflict toward international engagement while insecurity continues. During French President Emmanuel Macron's visit to Damascus, explosions near the Four Seasons Hotel wounded at least 18 people. Macron continued his meeting with Syrian President Ahmed al-Sharaa, and France and Syria announced plans to restore diplomatic ties. French companies also signed agreements involving infrastructure reconstruction, airport development, and financial support. The visit was intended to signal that Syria's new government can become a partner for international investment, but the attacks demonstrated that security remains the biggest obstacle to normalization. The broader picture from the region is that the competition is shifting from individual conflicts toward control over the systems that shape power: shipping routes, energy infrastructure, political legitimacy, and military influence. Iran is trying to preserve leverage through pressure and disruption. The United States and Gulf states are trying to build alternatives that reduce Iranian influence. Turkey is positioning itself as a central regional player. Lebanon and Syria are struggling to rebuild while managing powerful armed actors. The next phase will depend heavily on whether the latest exchange around Hormuz becomes another contained escalation or the beginning of a broader return to war. Thanks for listening and being part of this growing community. If you found this valuable, I'd really appreciate you leaving a review or sharing a quick comment. It helps others discover the show. We also publish a daily written intel brief on Substack at restrictedhandling.substack.com, where we go deeper on Russia and China, along with analysis on Iran, the Middle East, and the DPRK. Have a great day. We appreciate you being here.